Are there any new Mercedes-Benz worth owning in 2025? With the increase of level of electrification, the increase in complexity and technology, and increase in cost, guess what? There's still a few wins out there, and I want to share a list of 5 of those key Mercedes-Benz that I would still consider owning. Let's get into it now. Life's too short to drive boring cars. Right there is a model I would definitely buy, one of those on my list. Why? Because it's lower price point vehicle. It's not going to cost you an arm and 3 legs, it has less technology, less to fail. JD Powers also ranks it about a 79 out of 100 in terms of overall reliability, considered one of the most reliable cars. Repair Pal doesn't mind them either. What I've experienced was very few problems with some of these entry-level Mercedes-Benz, other than the odd time there have been some cases with sunroofs that maybe malfunction, and the odd piece of trim and the odd electrical gremlin relates to some of the sensors, and there's no shortage of sensors. It is a Mercedes-Benz, but overall it's a pretty durable little workhorse. Has a lot of great tech. When we look, we have LEDs on the front, we have a great front grille, but this one clearly is not the base trim, because this one here is a turbo 4MATIC. You get a 7-speed dual clutch gearbox, driving power predominantly to the front and additional torque to the rear as needed. Here, this is an AMG. This is the upscale. Of course, you get the dual tailpipes there, the beautiful chrome along the back. This is the GLA 35. This is the AMG up spec. You get the bigger brakes, or cross-drilled ventilated brakes, 2-tone handles, and all that glass on top. These are lovely, but also the GLA 250 is the trim level, the entry-level trim with 221 horsepower, mild hybrid, as well as this gets a mild hybrid upgrade as well, and you get a great little performance boost. You get the M-Buck system, and it's truly a reliable little unit to drive around in. Great performance, great economy, and with only a handful of minor little issues, it doesn't feel like an S-Class, not even close, or a CLS. That's not the point. But because you don't have all of the extra technology in this vehicle, you don't have air ride suspension systems. You basically have a standard conventional suspension on these vehicles, means there's less to go wrong. That turbo 2-liter in either format, the base model, as well as the upgraded version that you're seeing, the M139 engine, that's part of the issue. That M139 engine that you're seeing in a lot of the smaller vehicles have somehow slithered their way into the C63Ss. And that's why the C63 is not a car I would buy. They finally made the V8 go away, that twin turbo V8, or even before that, the 6.2 or the 5.5. Those were lovely engines, but they're all gone now. So even the C-Class AMG is no longer available. Right there, that's the next one that's very disappointing. Here we see a 6.3 AMG. That's right, you used to find the 6.3, whether it's the latest generation in the C-Class, C63S, or the older ones with the 6.2-liter V8 in some of the older generations. Now, the latest generation of the C-Class, it's a great vehicle, has lots of technology, but the plastics aren't necessarily the strongest and the sturdiest. We have a coupe version of this vehicle, and we've had some problems along the way. We have a bit of a squeaky front end, and the front differential makes a little bit of noise. We've had some faults, but a lot of that might have been dealer related. They sprayed under the hood after an oil service, and all of a sudden we started getting all kinds of weird faults and codes, most of which have cleared up. Of course, these vehicles are susceptible to low battery power, and of course, so always having a good battery, take care of your maintenance, and doing your oil services well in advance is going to help you a long ways. But overall, a pretty reliable unit, because JD Powers actually rates the current 2025 Mercedes C-Class about an 80 out of 100. So it gets a strong rating. For the brand, it's one of the most reliable models you can get. Again, no air ride suspension. They keep it simple, and that's kind of the point. That's the theme here. The simpler, the better. Now, it still looks a lot like a modern day E-Class. It carries a lot of that family resemblance without necessarily carrying all the extra technology. Beautiful grille on there. You definitely have a lot of LEDs on the front. Beautiful. But under the hood, you can get a couple of different engine configurations. One, of course, is the base engine, 255 horsepower, 2-liter turbo, inline, longitudinal. You get a 9-speed automatic transmission. All makes it very smooth shifting. It's predominantly a rear-wheel drive as opposed to the smaller GLA GLBs. This, as well as the GLC, is rear-wheel drive, but in the 4MATIC, they give you extra torque to the front. So that's the all-wheel drive in the 4MATIC version. You get lots of technology, big sunroofs. You hear a lot of horror stories about that last piston blowing in some early generations of the early C300 and the W205 like this. Of course, the latest generation isn't a 205. They've stepped it up to 206, but generally speaking, early generations of that turbo 2-liter have had some issues. Basically, a Renault-derived 4-cylinder engine. The newer ones have the bigger screens. They now have hybrid assist. They have the newer M-Buck system, which is much better than our older system, which doesn't even have remote starting. And it's nice to have some of those features when it's really cold outside. The only real big disappointment is if you want to step up and upscale your C-Class, is the C63 is gone. Okay, they have the 43. But the old V6 back in 2023 is gone too. So now if you want a C-Class, you're gonna have to go with a 2-liter engine pretty much exclusively. Base model gets you a 2-liter engine with 255 horse, and you could step it up to the C43, which is also an M139 2-liter turbo 4-cylinder, longitudinal, but sadly you can no longer get a V6, V8, and that's a major downfall for Mercedes. Right there's the next Mercedes I would seriously buy. Right there we're talking about an E-Class. Now, unfortunately, JD Power rates it at 83 out of 100 for the 2023 model year, but you also had some of the better engines, V6s, the big V8s, and those were options. The E63S is truly my favorite. Sure, it's a little more technical. Sure, it has a little bit more of the issues of potential air ride, the bigger engines, more expensive maintenance. It's a luxurious point of entrance for many Mercedes-Benz. It's just big enough to feel luxurious. It's just small enough to park in almost every garage. You get a few different engine choices. You get, of course, a base trim in 300. You get with a turbocharged 2-liter engine, really has no right being in an E-Class, but you can get that. In an all-wheel drive, of course, predominantly to the rear wheels driving, and of course, upgrade to the front wheel gets you the extra torque to the front wheels with the 4MATIC system. Also, in this version, the E450, you can also step into a turbocharged inline 6-cylinder engine, gets you enough performance, and on top of it, you can also get yourself a hybrid version, step up to the game with a 6-cylinder hybrid in the top trim level. Now, you do get good performance in those top trims, and they do feel fun and fresh and spirited, but it just lacks that performance. And unfortunately, the EU7 regulations in Europe are dictating smaller engines, less fuel consumption, more efficient, but that's what Mercedes has been trying to get on board with, trying to create engines. A lot of these 2-liter turbo engines that are regulated, unfortunately, a lot of the old V8s are now gone away. So if I could go back to 23, I would definitely buy the E63S. Otherwise, the E-Class is one of those just sweet spots. Has all of the latest technology without going absolute overboard. These vehicles, although they're not cheap like a Honda Accord, they certainly do have an improved level of overall durability. JD Power likes them, has a great look, it's conservative, but yet it feels very, very luxurious. You do get the beautiful LED headlights. Look at the laser cut wheels, very classic. Laser punched and ventilated brakes right there. All kinds of nice detailing. Two-tone handles, big sunroof on the top, and they're all very, very luxurious. This here would be one of my go-tos if I was actually looking and I wanted to make an impact and say, you know what, this is where I'm spending my money for a luxury car. I truly believe this would be one of the best Mercedes I could spend my money on. Right here is actually one of my personal favorites. Again, price point subcompact, but it's one of the best subcompact SUVs, not just in the luxury car segment, any segment that can house a third row as an upgrade. Yes, you get some great features, and that's why it seems like a value-packed vehicle. You get heated front seats as standard, optional third row, which is a huge issue with a lot of these SUVs. You either got to go huge to get that third row or you don't get it at all. But that's the beauty with these vehicles, and it actually fits. For a guy like me at around 5'11" or thereabouts, I could actually sit at the very back in the third row, my knees just touching the back seat in front of me, and as well my head just lightly grazing. There's actually enough room there. I've tried the Volkswagen Tiguan. The third row is sad and pathetic, but this one actually works. But on top of it, you get very similar drivetrains as the CLA, a hybrid, mild hybrid upgrade. You get 221 horsepower that comes out of that 2-liter turbocharged 4. It's also a predominantly front-wheel drive because what you get is a dual clutch gearbox driven through 7 speeds. It's fun, it's quick, but I mean, it's a little unpolished. It doesn't feel all that refined. And you'll notice when you put it in gear and you let off the brake or let off the gas, it tends to not move until you give it a little throttle. That's typical for dual clutch gearboxes. Just takes some getting used to, the ergonomics of it all. And if they're very great looking SUVs, I think they're a sight to behold, certainly a little bit dialed back, and I think that's the overall look, and that's why I like them. You get the big 3-pointed star up front. You get the very conservative headlights on there, although they're LEDs. You get the extra lighting there, of course, small laser cut rims, but you'll notice standard brakes because this is the standard version, and you get that 2-liter engine, that 7-speed dual clutch gearbox, but you also get all kinds of great two-tone detailing. You get all kinds of glass on the roof, and it's a great looking unit. This one here is the GLB 250. JD Powers also gives us an 80 out of 100 for durability, and again, other than the odd case where I've heard people complain about the drivability of the dual clutch or sunroofs coming off the rails, the odd glitchy electrical gremlin related to sensors, make sure that you're running a good battery, because a lot of these Mercedes-Benz are susceptible to problem areas and spitting out weird check engine lights or weird gremlins once you run a low battery. But overall, it's a simpler vehicle. You don't have all that air ride suspension systems, all of that ceiling lighting. You do get a bunch of ambient lighting through LEDs, but that's a very reliable system in general. And these are very, very fun, durable, and actually extremely practical. You can haul this behind your RV, throw it in behind a 22-foot trailer and haul it down to your spot in Palm Springs, or in fact just drive it around as a daily. really. Good on fuel, it's fun, it's peppy, and has all the tech that you possibly need. Right there's another one that I love because it's based largely on the Mercedes-Benz that we own. You can also get a couple of different variations and a couple different drivetrains in this particular SUV. It's a nice mid-size. You also don't have the air ride suspension typically like you're going to find in an E and an S-Class. And it's, again, a slightly simpler vehicle, but yet it has miles more refinement than you're finding in the GLA or GLB or any of those vehicles, because it's now more of a mid-size. It has another set of engines available to it, and this vehicle here does get you a 9-speed torque converter automatic transmission, so it's going to feel smoother. The suspension is a little bit more refined than you're getting in the GLA and GLBs. This GLC, like you're looking at right here, the GLC 300, does give you all the great all-wheel drive systems, 4MATIC. Of course, you get the LEDs, beautiful little tailpipes down there. You don't get many of those anymore. Audi's just basically blanking those off these days, but you get a great couple of engine combinations. However, there is a disappointment because in 2023 was the last year of the engine that I think is one of their ultimately best engines ever. There was a V6 engine that was notoriously reliable. Sure, it had the odd little glitch or gremlin, but it was a durable unit, and it was a V6. I mean, who doesn't like a V6 engine? But unfortunately, they've gotten rid of that as the upgraded 43 AMG version, and now have replaced it with a 2-liter turbo 4-cylinder engine instead, which is a hotter version of this. So the GLC 300 like this gets you 255 horsepower. It's basically a decent little peppy unit, which is a mild hybrid, but you can also step into something a little bit more upscale. With the GLC 43 gets you a little bit more ponies and a hotter version of course, a turbocharged 2-liter engine. More of an AMG warmed over. M139 ring a bell? Either way, in base form at 255 ponies or up to well in excess of 300, you can get a decent, fun revving little unit. Of course, a smoother transmission. The interior and fit and finish is a lot nicer on these than it is on the GLA and GLB. Of course, you do get the two-tone here, and interesting wheels, a larger wheel package, and of course, lots of glass on the roof, just so you can let a lot of light into the cabin. These are very, very nice to drive, and JD Power also gives it a 78 out of 100 in terms of overall reliability, and I can honestly speak to reliability. We've had some issues with our vehicle, the C300, which is almost the same unit. Mainly it had to do with lighting modules or some kind of lighting sensors and failures, but outside of that, it's been a pretty reliable unit. But it doesn't just come in this garden variety standard looking SUV style, it actually has another look too. You can also get this coupe format, which is an SUV, but it's a little more sleek. It's more competing with BMW's X4, and Mercedes-Benz had to come to something to the table with a very similar product, and they did. Has the same engines, the same transmissions, but it has a sleeker look to it. Of course, you get the LED headlights. It's a new redesign. Look at the front grille's quite different. Of course, those rims are quite different as well, but you get that nice little rocker detailing and that sleeker back end. So it's a love-hate. Some people love it, some don't, but the GLC 300 in this current style is certainly something that is worth a look. And of course, why are Mercedes so cheap on the used car market? Well, there's a lot of great reasons, and I share that with you. You're going to want to check it out. Hope to see each and every one of you real soon, everyone, and we'll talk to you all real later. Bye-bye.